put it online. I'm going to take it and I'm going to, please announce it. If you will announce it, then I will play. And I had 75 people come on Facebook and Zoom, and I had them both going at the same time, and my poor computer fan was like pumping out a mile a minute. It was so noisy. And I really said to myself, I can't stop. I just can't. I don't know who I am if I'm not playing. And I admit that is a problem. That's a problem, that I don't know who I am when I'm not playing. If I've learned anything, it's that you have to know who you are when you're not making your art. But I haven't figured out how to do that yet. So, and fortunately I'm half vaccinated, so let's hope that I can get through it and keep playing.
Right. It's so interesting how dependent our self-identity becomes over the years.
Yeah. Inextricably linked.
Absolutely. I mean, pre-pandemic, so long before we ever knew this world. I want to say it was like 2014. It must have been 15, right after Benjamin was born. I lost my voice completely for a period of 5 months. I mean, I could not phonate. There was no resonance. The vocal folds were not working. It turned out to be severe allergies, but it took a very long time to figure that out. And I mark that as, I think, one of the most depressing time periods. I mean, because we don't regularly define ourselves. If we are not, if I'm not using my instrument to lead prayer and to inspire people, and I would argue that you do exactly the same thing, then how do we define ourselves? It's fascinating to me. I want to talk for a second about that musical example, because I don't want the opportunity to slip by.
Sure.
So much of what you are doing is not on the page. So I will say that when I watch you and when I listen to you, it's I think of what Beethoven did as a roadmap, right? Like a recipe card. And you are a seasoned chef. And we had the opportunity in this very series last week to sit with Dr. Sean Goodman, who is just finishing up her doctorate in jazz clarinet, or jazz saxophone. Gosh, I'm getting it wrong. Anyway, both. She's got both, because if you get bored with one instrument, just
right, then you go to another.
Player.
Yeah, right.
Anyway,
no, that's appropriate for saxophone players, not for pianists.
No, I know.
There's too much to do.
Tenor? Like, what am I
There's too much to do. Saxophone players, I get it.
We talked at length about the jazz world and how what you're playing is not on the page, right? But I think in the classical world, it's just so different in that, of course, you are playing what's on the page, but I want you to walk us kind of in between the notes, in between the bar lines. What exists? What decisions are you making?
I'm examining that a lot right now. I started, Hilary Hahn, the very, very well-known classical violinist, started I see some nods, yeah, so you all know her, wonderful. She started a practice on Instagram, so on her social media accounts, called 100 Days of Practice. And she's in her 5th go-through. She's actually 10 days ahead of me now. And what she does is she chronicles her practice in very vulnerable and very real way with a short video. It's anywhere from 1 minute. Actually, I think the one time her phone died, so it was 43 seconds. She practiced 43 seconds that day. 43 seconds to 6 minutes, and just sort of demonstrating what her process is. And we'll probably get into this a little bit later, but I'm in the midst of learning all the complete, learning and relearning in some cases, the complete Debussy preludes and a set of pieces that were composed for me by the living composer about whom I wrote my dissertation, whose name is Amy Williams. She's a Pittsburgh-based composer. And I decided to do the 100 Days of Practice as a way to not only reclaim some of the practice techniques that I have lost. Because during the pandemic, as I said, I've been sort of cycling through repertoire instead of really digging deeply into repertoire, but also as a way to explore and understand my own process a little bit better. And I think that a lot of what you're asking, Cantor Aviva, is what is the process for getting to that point? And it's interesting because, first of all, I am going to answer this question differently than any other classical pianist, just because We're all so different. But speaking for myself, I'm a very visual learner. I can sight read anything that you put in front of me. And so very often the the getting to know a piece is really in the memorization process. And even though I like to say that the only reason I get nervous, I love to perform, but the only reason I get nervous is because I'm fearful of having a memory slip. Even though I feel that way, I I would never perform a work of solo piano music in a live concert with actual people there. Um, the difference being virtual, of course. If there's something that I have to record within 2 weeks, then there's only
Sure.
so much memorizing I can do. But I always play from memory unless it's new music, and part of that is just the complexity changes, the language changes, and it's something where I don't force myself. It's a different learning process. But for me, the process of memorizing a piece, because I can sit down and I had a former roommate who was a clarinetist who used to call people like me who are very visual and sort of suck up the music very quickly and visually a note monger. I'm a note monger. And so
I
I
love
can
that.
sit down, yeah, I can sit down and I can look at a piece of music and I figured out all of the all the formal information. I've gotten all the theoretical information, harmonic information. I've gotten a sense for what the technical, the challenges are going to be. I've got a sense for the character of the music, and the piece could be learned within 3 days if I needed it to be. And I'm talking maybe a Debussy prelude. But actually, that Beethoven came together very quickly because I had just moved to Chicago. I had uprooted my life I had been teaching at Franklin College, and then I moved up from Indianapolis. They didn't get me my contract until really, so it was all really like I played my final doctoral recital very shortly beforehand. It was all very frazzled, and I had to learn it and be ready to sit in front of that 80-piece orchestra and Maestro Laureano and be ready to go. And so, but in the memorization process, what I like to say happens is that I go from being the interpreter, well, I go from being the pianist to being the interpreter, the vehicle for the composer's voice.
Right. Right.
And whenever that happens, it's always going to have some Clare Longendyke in it. Always. There's no way it can't. But would you really want to hear the same people interpret? I mean, otherwise there's no interpretation. It's just white bread every time. It's just dots and lines on the page. That's all you're hearing. And so, some sort of things that my priorities in my interpretation are timing. I think that all the great artists, what sets them apart from so the creme de la creme from the creme is timing, and that sense of anticipation. If you can get an audience member to go, then you've got them. It's just, and it's, I had a friend, a colleague say this to me. I was working on the Ravel Concerto actually when I was in college for the department-wide concerto competition at Boston University, and I fell in love with this piece. It got canceled this year, sadly. I'm supposed to play it with the Bloomington Symphony, but it's rescheduled for February, so fingers crossed that next February, 2022. Fingers crossed. But she said to me, she's somebody that I have such great respect for, just a wonderful pianist, another note monger. I mean, the woman can learn music, as easily as I can read English. And she said to me, all you need is one single moment. And you can plan what that moment is. That's part of the deciding it. All you need is to know exactly where you're going to make them wait, or you're going to surprise them, or whatever that is. And so my process is turning those dots and lines into moments. And when I can do that and I can string them together in a way that takes them off the page, then I know that I've accomplished something, and that I'm doing something that nobody has done before me. Because
Right.
I like to tell people, I've had a lot of, there's a lot of talk, especially in the new music world. I have my foot in two different worlds. I've got my foot in the new music world, and the new music world doesn't really trust the people in the old music world. They think that they're just sort of, playing the music of dead white European males, dwems, as my friend Joan Tower, the composer Joan Tower, calls them.
Right.
And old musicians who are sort of from the old school and are still play a lot of Beethoven and still play a lot of the classics, the canon. They think that new musicians play new music because they're not good enough to play old music. And there's some truth to both. There's some truth to both. I will say that. Having a foot in both. And my job is to prove that I belong in both for good reasons. But, part of what has informed my approach to playing old music is working with composers and understanding that there is so much that can't be described in dots and lines. And part of my experience in working with old music and taking that into new music has been a trust in what the composer wrote. And it's something in that middle ground, that I really cherish. And that's where the sweet spot is for me.
Do you find that new music and music by living composers comes with either an added weight of having them in the audience, or I mean, I've performed in front of Bach's grave, but
No.
to my knowledge, he wasn't there. You know what I mean? Like,
He
I
may have
don't
been.
know that I would have been as confident with those motets, but do you find that living composers are very particular about performance practice and what they want and expect in their own pieces?
You know, don't tell anybody I said this, but I find that 9 times out of 10, they have they have a vision. They have an aural vision of what they want, but they don't. But they're happy with so many different variations of that vision, and they're in general, they're just so pleased that somebody's playing their music.
Right.
I mean, and that has informed the way I approach Bach and Beethoven and Mozart. It's like, oh my gosh, I had this little memory slip and it was the end of the world. And, sometimes a living composer won't even notice. And that just leads me to say, would Beethoven have cared if I had that beautiful moment, even if 6 minutes before I had a little bit of a memory slip and I had a double take or whatever it was? And I don't think it's, I mean, we idolize these dead composers. We put them on these pedestals. We build a mountain and then we put them on a pedestal, and it's untouchable. And the teachers of my teacher's generation taught us to revere them in a very unhealthy way. I think I don't teach my students to revere them. I teach my students to see themselves in what's written on the page and to interpret it and to have a voice. And I'm in this place where I'm fighting myself. I have to convince myself that I have something to contribute to the Debussy preludes because they have been recorded and recorded and recorded and recorded and recorded and recorded and recorded. And of course, the CD that I'm going to be recording this summer is half music or a third music that has never been recorded. So that's my contribution. But also these Debussy preludes, and what I have to look at myself in the mirror and remind myself is that I am a 33-year-old culturally Jewish doctor of music living in Indianapolis with parents who are not in music. My identity, nobody shares my identity. So there is nobody that is going to want to play them the way I play them or record them the way I record them. And I have to have the faith that that is going to be an addition and a contribution. But it takes a lot of looking at oneself in the mirror and saying,
sure,
you are worth it. You have something to say.
And when you and I spoke, we touched on this also, and this this is almost an unfortunate common thread as I speak to all of these musicians who I think, as I say, bring a sense of humility to their practice. Most of whom don't use their doctoral titles, which were hard earned, right? But we speak about this imposter syndrome, about this idea that will we ever be good enough? So in this vein, Claire, I want you to tell us a little bit about how you grew up. So you mentioned before that neither parent is a musician, that your musicianship was not genetic in any way,
Right.
to your knowledge. So tell us a little bit about, you grew up in Chicago, only musician in your family. Yeah, take us from there.
So I was born in Chicago. My parents met at IUB in Bloomington in the English department, Ballantine Hall at IU. For anybody that moved up to Indianapolis from Bloomington, you probably know it well. And so they met at IU and then moved to Chicago. And my dad always says that whenever you move, the first thing you do is set up the record player. My dad is somebody that listens. I mean, I was exposed from the womb to everything from John Coltrane to Richard Thompson. And I have a deep, deep appreciation for folk music and jazz, even though I would never dare. I have such an appreciation for them that I sort of put them up on that pedestal, and I would never dare try to be that kind of musician, first of all, because I think it's way more difficult. That's the getting found syndrome, I think. But and so I was surrounded by music, and my great aunt was a jazz singer in New York. Roma Bloch was a jazz singer in New York, but apparently my grandfather would have to accompany her to these jazz bars in the 40s because she was too young really to be there. But I know, wasn't that sweet? She had a beautiful voice. Oh my gosh, it was unbelievable. Um, and so from a very young age, I was always singing. I was always singing, and I was just sort of vocalizing, and I was a very independent child. I'm still a very independent person. And my parents enrolled me in this music initiation class in Lincoln Park in Chicago, and I was just like lit a fire in me. We moved to Minneapolis when I was young. I started kindergarten in Minneapolis. And I was one of those kids who asked to take piano lessons. My friend Alex Holshoe was taking piano lessons, so I wanted to take piano lessons. And I don't remember this, but my mother says that she never had to tell me to practice. And part of that, I will say, I had a very traditional American young pianist upbringing. I played Disney songs all the time. All the time, all the time, all the time. I have all the old Disney books, and I loved it because I mean, Alan Menken, he knew I don't remember if he's the lyricist or the composer, but
Tim Rice.
Tim Rice, thank you.
Tim Rice, right?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And, I used to regret it so much. I used to feel that I'd missed so much because I didn't start playing Bach until I was 14, maybe 13, 14. It was so late. And I used to beat myself up for it. But I'm convinced. And then in high school, I was playing Sondheim. I was playing these really complicated musical theater. I was really involved in the theater department. And I'm convinced that my sense of timing comes from playing popular music styles. And my ear comes from playing popular music styles. So I started taking piano lessons, and my teacher said to my parents, so, she has a really good musical ear, and she can play by ear. She can play anything. And the funny story is that my mom likes to tell is that I picked out You're a Grand Old Flag on my little keyboard. I had a little keyboard that was like 28 keys or something, and the keys were just barely bigger than my fingers. Then we used to charge the battery overnight, and I used to put it on the dining room table. And then my grandmother and grandfather, I think that they maybe they changed apartments or something in Florida, and so they shipped up their upright piano. So I had a piano after 6 months. I showed so much promise that my parents said we should probably upgrade her from this stinky little keyboard. And so my grandparents sent up, and my grandparents on my mother's side were really my champions. I mean, my parents are, of course, my number one fans, but they've never really pretended to understand what I do. And my grandparents just didn't care. I mean, and my grandparents on my father's side loved me and appreciated me, but we're talking New York Jewish grandparents who we have a musician in the family, our Clea. So it was just, I could do no wrong in terms of pursuing a sort of harebrained career path and not knowing if it was going to pan out. They were like, just do it. Just do it. Just go and make music. And they gave me my first Chopin cassette tape when I was 6, and I said, who's chopping? And then it was Rubinstein. It was a Rubinstein cassette tape that I didn't listen to. It sat under my bed for the longest time, and then finally I said, maybe I should listen to this stuff. And I said, okay, yeah, this is what I want to do. But meanwhile, I continued to play Disney songs, and it wasn't until I was really 16 when I made the decision that I wanted to give it a go. And of course, Cantor, Aviva, you and I talked about how back in the day that meant nothing because I had no idea what I was getting myself into.
Right.
And these days, any musician that is over than 25, I would say, and has only gone to conservatory or school of music has gone anytime before the last 10 years. They just had nobody told anybody what it meant to be an artist, to be a musician, and to have a career. And that's why it's so sad to see. I mean, it's the attrition of musicians into other fields is, everybody has to find their niche. But my dad gave me a year to figure it out, and I went to Boston University for college, and he said, otherwise you probably need to have a double degree, or you need to change majors because you have a lot of catching up to do. We all know you have a lot of catching up to do, and if you're not willing to put in the time, then I'm not willing to write the checks. And I said, challenge accepted, and I spent 40 hours in the practice room a week, and the rest is history.
It's so interesting because I feel like we grew up in a generation where I remember being young and you were told that you just went to college, and after college you got a job, and that these jobs were just waiting for college grads to come out and scoop them up, and you follow your dreams and you follow your passion, and then your Jewish father is saying, and when are you going to law
Yeah.
school?
Right.
So like, and we're so glad that you did your degree in music and now you can apply to law school, and so I remember having a master's in music, working in a mall, going, what am I doing, having that like food court breakdown,
Yeah.
And it does. There's almost a sense among colleagues of like, you don't want to sell out. You don't want to, because you are
Oh,
so
yeah.
dedicated to this. And it's not an easy road. And yet what astounds me about you, Claire, is this, and we've talked about this sense of conviction that you are like a freight train. Like you just you are not stopping. I mean, I really I haven't even noticed you pause for a moment in this last year, that you really just have this sense of conviction. Like when your dad said, I will give you a year to decide, if that was just like, bring it on, I
It's
love that.
interesting. Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. So I did take a break. I did take a little bit of a break this summer, and during that break, I wrote my dissertation, a 200-page dissertation. So I have not had a break. Um, and it's funny. I recently learned about a book called Burnout.
Mm.
And what's interesting about this book, of course, I got it from a Brene Brown podcast. And the reason I was enticed to listen to this podcast and to really check out this book is because it's written by two twin sisters, the Nagoski sisters, so their names. And one is a physical therapist of some kind, a relationship therapist, I believe. And the other has a doctoral degree in choral conducting. And it's all about burnout, artistic, emotional, physical burnout. And I listened to the podcast and was just struck and said, wow, I was really burned out. That statement in my bio about playing 50 concerts a year is not false. The year that I turned 32, it just so happened that I had 32 concerts leading up to my birthday, my 32nd birthday, but my birthday is at the end of May. So that was, and I'm sorry, that was from January 1st to May 22nd.
Oof.
And then after that, I went to Italy and played like 30 more concerts in the summer festival. And so part of it is that I can point to the advice that I've been given that led to burnout. The first piece of advice was when I was living in Paris in 2007, and a mentor said to me, never say no to a concert. Check. The other was, do what you have to do in order to get the good concert, meaning, if the good concert paid. So for example, I went to San Francisco on tour and I got a couple of interesting concerts. They had different programs, mind you. So hour long. So I had 2 hours of music to be playing. And San Francisco is an extremely expensive place. And I was making like $450 from these two concerts combined. It paid so little. That barely paid my flight. And at that point, I'm managed now, though you wouldn't guess it by how much my manager does. I still do all the work for him. Which is that's another whole master's talk. But I self-managed and self-produced all these tours. And so I was like, okay, I've got 2 interesting concerts. How many concerts do I need to play in order to make it worth my time? And I played 8 concerts in 11 days. And, some of them, it was like $125 here and $400 here. It was like, woo, yes, got it. That was a good one. And, so that piece of advice where do what you have to do in order to get the good concert, no matter what that means. And I've taken a little bit too seriously.
Right.
I will never say those things to my students. I will teach
Right.
them how to decide, how to take care of themselves, and how to decide when it's worth making the sacrifice. And otherwise, I'm no good if I haven't slept and haven't eaten and
Right.
have COVID or whatever, and a lot of that has come up now. It's pretty sad to see the way that etiquette amongst artists and presenters has changed based on demand for performance opportunities and just the need, sort of things coming together last minute because it's virtual, and so that you have to get a license, and we didn't figure that out, and so can you change your program?
Right.
And I'm afraid about what the world is going to look like, and being the one that isn't afraid to say no, but also realizes that might make me not the person that gets asked. It's
Right. No,
it's a
I
very
hear
tricky
you.
industry.
I think it's such a recent phenomenon that the idea of self-care
Mm-hmm.
plays into who we are nowadays. I remember growing up, my I remember the idea of kind of scoffing at me time, and how that if you worked hard, you didn't take me time,
Oh no.
and I do think that there's a gender piece at play here, right?
Oh
that
yeah.
that for a long time, and I would argue,
Still.
that we're still kind of fighting for the right to be in the ring with the men. And
Mm-hmm.
so pregnancy, that's not going to hold me back. And maternity leave, oh, forget it, I'll come back the day after a C-section. Like, it's craziness. It's
Or you
craziness.
have
And
to. You don't have a
right,
choice. I have
right.
two examples of that. I have two friends. One, his wife is pregnant, and one, she is pregnant. And they sort of subscribe to this idea that in order to be successful, in order to appear successful, you have to demonstrate that you're burned out and that you're stressed and that you're all the time. That's a thing amongst musicians. Oh gosh, I'm so tired. I'm so stressed. So my
Right.
one friend is going to have a baby in May, and she writes to me. She says, "I'm pregnant. I have the baby in May, and then I go right into teaching for the next 8 weeks for summer." And I was like,
What are you doing?
am
Yeah.
I supposed to be impressed with that? Because I think that's just silly. And then
Right, right, right.
the other one, they're going to be out. Both of them are going to be out teaching on the East Coast. They're going to drive out from Tucson, have the baby on the East Coast, continue teaching and taking care of the baby. And I was like, I can't, send me updates. Can't hear, wait here. I don't even have any children, and I
Oh,
can't wait to hear how that goes.
and it's
So,
crazy, as you talk about like your fear about what this pandemic has done. I think, I mean, obviously this is a whole other episode or podcast, if you will, but of course we know that millions of women have left the workforce. We know that. And then the millions who have stayed in the workforce have just put on a smile and pretended that we can do it all.
yeah.
Um, all the while just muting yourself when your baby's screaming in the background.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so I think it's but that's a whole other conversation. But I am with you in like, what is the world going to look like when we return?
And
What I do,
hopefully self-care will be a little
yeah,
bit more
I think
front and
so.
center for artists. I hope
Well,
that.
and I think that, you as a teacher, whether you're a teacher, a mother, a friend, a mentor, I think we have a responsibility to the generations to come to
Yeah.
teach against burnout.
Yeah.
That artistry and what you bring to life when you play Beethoven, or anything, all of that artistry that happens in between the notes,
Mm.
that doesn't happen after 18 concerts and no sleep. You
No,
know,
no,
that
it
is
takes
when
freshness.
artistry becomes robotic, and that is when we lose what it is that makes us worthy of the seat at the table in the first place.
Yes.
So with that, Claire, I want you to share another example.
Yeah,
If you
sure.
could set it up for us and tell us a little bit about what we're about to hear.
Sure. There we go. Okay, I will, oops, that's not the one that we want. Once again, fighting with technology. Let's do a little bit of Debussy. I was just talking about Debussy. I'm on a little bit of a Debussy kick right now, partially because of this piece. I was very lucky to have been asked to play a concert on a very prestigious series that is based out of the University of Chicago, but generally does not include local artists because it's meant to be sort of an introductory series that introduces Chicago and University of Chicago audiences to out-of-state performers. But because we were completely virtual and many artists couldn't travel, I had the opportunity as artist in residence to create and curate a concert that focused on the beautiful Gothic architecture of the university and pairing that with music. And it's been interesting because that has sort of launched a different series of concerts that I'd love to talk about a little bit later. But This is a piece that I picked up at the very beginning of the pandemic. It was sort of a bucket list piece that I was finally able to tackle. And I'd played the third movement for college auditions, but had not had the opportunity to learn the first two movements. And it really helped me, Cantor Aviva, talking about sort of bringing the music to life. This is the piece that really helped me think about that process a little bit more fully. So this is the first movement, pagode or pagodas, of Debussy's Estampe. And Estampe means an imprint. And pagode is reflective of the Javanese gamelan tradition that Debussy was introduced to in 1889 at the World's Fair in Paris. So you'll hear a lot of sort of an approach, a metallic approach, and very pentatonic style of harmonic writing that he incorporates.
What do you think when you watch yourself play that? What do you think of?
Um, that's a performance I'm really proud of. I mean, a lot went into it. It is edited, so you can see it's not only video edited, but I was able to sort of pick and choose audio so that I was presenting the best version of myself, which is always nice. But it really feels like, it really feels like I was able to give birth, for lack of a better phrase, but give birth to what I believe in my mind the music should sound like. And so for a performance like that, probably a lot of pride. I think I have a lot of pride in seeing it. It's also, so that performance was at the Rockefeller Memorial Chapel, which, if you know anything about the University of Chicago campus or Chicago in general, is just this gorgeous, big, enormous church, really huge, on campus. And you walk in and you're just struck by the architecture of it. And it sort of, the music sort of brought the sanctuary to life in a really interesting way, despite the fact that there was nobody there besides me and the two engineers. And so I also think about sort of the way that the architecture informs the music and the way that music informs the architecture. So I love that performance because it really is about, it's not just about the music, it's not just about the performance, it's about the entirety of what you're seeing. And that was a really fun project for me.
It is a performance that you ought to be incredibly proud of.
Thank you.
Stunning. How, or maybe I should say, how does, if at all, your Judaism or your sense of Jewish identity inform how you approach music?
That's a good question. that's one I should have thought about that before. Um, so, I mean, maybe just a little bit of background first.
Sure.
So, I grew up. Cantor, Aviva, and I were talking because this is maybe a part of my life that you didn't even know. My mother is Jewish and comes from a very strong background of as I mentioned earlier, New York Jews, um, who. So my mother was not bat mitzvahed because back then it was not for women. It was not given that you would have been bat mitzvahed. But from a very young age, and actually, Cantor Viva, after this part of our conversation, I started thinking about my history of appreciation for my Judaism and for my Jewish background. And I would say that a lot of my draw to my Jewish culture, because my father's Episcopalian, my father grew up Episcopalian, but really we don't practice. I told a very funny anecdote about I started in public school in Minneapolis, and was an extremely bright and talented kid and was in all the advanced programs. And then when the education in the public schools in the late 90s started to turn towards really supporting those that weren't as bright and sort of leaving the rest the brighter students to sort of fend for themselves, my parents decided that I needed a little bit a different approach to education, to elementary education and junior high. And so I went to a parochial school. It was the best education in town, but it was, there were a lot of social things that it was very cliquey, it was very difficult, and it was Catholic. And I really took a lot of pride in being different, and not only being different, but having this side of my mother's family that was just so that I associated myself with. I looked very Jewish, although the Catholics didn't necessarily recognize that. And my grandparents were very proud. My grandmother would always ask, "How's your boyfriend? Is he Jewish?" And even if it didn't matter, it never mattered to her. But she just wanted to know. That was always a question. And because there was sort of that musical draw on my mother's side, especially to having my great aunt who was a singer, I think that was so. I really took ownership over my Jewish culture around the time that I went to parochial school, and that coincided with a time when I became obsessed, and I really can say obsessed, with reading fictional young adult literature about the Holocaust. And I remember, Number the Stars and Night, and those were books that, I just devoured them. I was just it was this awakening to humanity that involved people who were related to me. And I think that's something that unifies all of us in very, very deep and inexplicable ways. And so I would say that I appreciate exploring music, in particular by Jewish composers, that is inspired by Hebrew and Jewish folk music. I have a composer friend in particular who writes a lot of music. His music is very inspired by his Judaism. And I've played quite a bit of his music, his solo piano music. He's written for me, and he's just a dear, dear friend. But in terms of, I would say that even though that, I think that my artistic identity is so closely linked to my personal identity, and that's such an important part of my personal identity, even if I am, I loved in the Sisterhood Seder invite, it said you can be Jewish, Jew-ish, and even though I'm more Jew-ish, I love, it's the tradition of Judaism that attracts me to the culture, and it's the tradition of classical music that attracts me to informing my interpretations. And so I think that they run very parallel, but I would say that I can very confidently declare that I try to not let any facet that is divisive, regardless of what that is, enter into my artistry. And a great example of that is I wouldn't never call myself somebody that had very strong politics until the last election, maybe the last two elections. And I have a supporter who is a dear, dear friend and a wonderful person who has the exact opposite politics as I do. And he loves the way I play. He is a donor to my projects. He supports Music in Bloom. He supports my commissioning fund that I do a lot of personal artistic fundraising that allows me to commission living composers and create CDs and launch performance projects. And I do that all on my own. I write appeal letters and I do fundraising campaigns, and he is just a devout supporter of mine. And what I have learned is that my wish is that the art allow us to build a bridge where we don't bring those divisive parts of ourselves to the bridge, but it allows us to connect as humans and have a conversation about something that is so above humanity, but is embedded in humanity. Art is an expression of our humanity, but it's also it's divine in many ways. It is.
Sure.
There's something sparkling about it, and I really try. I have played pieces that are inspired by politics, or I have played pieces that are inspired by Judaism, by fragments of different religions. I've played, variation sets based on hymns. I love hymns. Playing hymns or something. I mean, that is like playing. It's like playing Bach chorales. It feels good. But I think that that's one spot where I can say that a lot of the parts of my identity run parallel, but especially when it comes to areas of it's not that I don't want to offend anybody by any means. I am naturally an offender. I speak my mind, and I am open about who I am, and I'm proud of who I am, and I stand up for myself and what I believe in. But when it comes to coming together in the middle to hear the music, I try to really, my cat says hello. I try to make it about the music.
I love this. God, Claire, I could listen to you and talk to you for hours. I mean, we still have a coffee date, a long-standing coffee date that we need to have. But as we reach this point in the hour, I want to ask you 2 questions and then move into what I call the lightning round, which is where you don't get to sound as polished, and I get to throw some questions at you. So first, I want to know, and I'll make it one question. So, how do you, as an artist, emerge from the pandemic? How differently, or how will the pandemic inform your art as you emerge? And what is next? What's next for you? What are you working on?
Sure. How will I emerge? I hope that I will emerge a healthier artist, to be honest. Mentally healthier, emotionally healthier, not burned out. But also a little bit more sure of my artistic identity. I know that I've grown artistically. I had a colleague, I did a MasterClass at a school in Tennessee where a friend and colleague of mine teaches, and she said, you've been so inspiring because I can hear how much you've improved since we last played together. And she said, your playing is 3D now. It's like, wow. It has so many different angles, and it's 3-dimensional. So I'm hoping that was a huge compliment coming from her, and I'm hoping to revel in that a little bit and explore what that actually means in my interpretation, my approach. The pandemic for me has been a way to cross off a lot of big projects. I wrote my dissertation during the pandemic. I actually don't even know if I would have had time to finish my doctorate. I'm applying for tenure track positions right now, and if I were to get a tenure track position, either they would require it or they would not care, and I would let it fall by the side of the road. So I'm very proud to have finished that. And even though I am half vaccinated and we're starting to talk about and see that people are coming out of the other end of the tunnel, that pickup, the momentum that I had built pre-pandemic feels like it's gone. And that is a very sad thing for me, because I was going to have my biggest season. I was playing with orchestra 5 times, and I had really started to build a network of collaborators and conductors and presenters who had faith in the way that I played and were willing and ready to present me, which takes a lot of trust building and a lot of nagging, sending a lot of emails, and a lot of that it's just gone. It's just going to be rebuilding from maybe not 0, but definitely not plus 100 either. And so what I've done is I've turned towards another big bucket list project, which is recording this CD. And I don't know that when I would have made time or had time to do it. I'm really excited. It's become a larger project. It's a 2 CD set now. So all of the Debussy preludes and these 2 books of piano portraits by Amy Williams, which I have a link to that I can drop in the chat so that people can explore that a little bit later. A little bit more contemporary, a little bit more on the contemporary side of what I do, but still, I think, very, very engaging music. And I'm really excited. I'm really excited to dive into that. I'm also sort of embracing the virtual right now because I have fans and supporters on both coasts and in the middle, and I'm launching with that program. So the 24 Debussy preludes and 10 piano portraits by Amy Williams, launching 2 virtual concert performances that embrace this idea of pairing. So the first one is a wine and cheese pairing concert with Debussy and Williams. And so when you buy a ticket, you get a box that has a little, 2-portion thing of champagne and a half bottle of wine and some cheeses. And as you go, this is still very much in the plan. I talk like it. I mean, it's very clear in my mind, but it's probably not going to happen until end of June or July. But as you go through the concert, you are guided through, and I talk about, this piece has this characteristics, which you can taste or feel in the texture of the cheese or in the taste of the wine or the bubbles of the champagne or something like that. And it's really been interesting for me as I've been thinking about what are the characteristics of this music and how does that inform. I literally went up to the cheese counter at Whole Foods and to Total Wine, which is now, very happily close to us, and I was looking for these key words in the descriptions, and I talked to the person behind the cheese counter and just sort of said, I'm looking for a cheese that blah blank. And so that's been really fun. And then the second side of that is I'm still waiting to hear about, fingers crossed that I get a grant for this, but a project that is in collaboration, a concert that's in collaboration with the Smart Museum of Art, which is on the University of Chicago campus. Not a very well-known art collection, but an enormous art collection and really beautiful variety of pieces, pairing artistic works from the collection with a different set of the Debussy preludes and the Amy Williams piano portraits. So embracing this idea that music itself is 3-dimensional and art is 3-dimensional, and we can glean more from the pairing those, or we can experience more from pairing those, and it's so much more popular and possible now that we're virtual, now that we have this idea of bridging that distance through virtual means.
I love that, by the way, everybody. She started by saying that, I'm going to emerge like healthier and not as burnt out. And then she was like, let me give you the laundry list of things that I'm now going to throw myself into. Claire, it is such a distinct pleasure. Every single time I get to speak with you or work with you in any way, I feel like I want more and more time. All of you should know that she is just a nice Jewish girl who lives very close to IHC, right? And what a gift it is that you're just around the corner from us.
I am. I'm so close. It's like a 5-minute drive. I love drive. Every time I drive by Meridian, I'm like, oh, hi everybody. Hello.
Quick questions. Where would you love to travel that you've never been?
Scotland.
Okay.
First
I know
on my
your
list.
heart is in Paris. I know we didn't have a chance to get into it, but I know that if you were to live anywhere else, it would be Paris, I'm sure.
Yes, it would be. Yeah.
What is the best stage or most enjoyable stage you've ever played on? Most memorable?
Probably at the École Normale. So where I got to perform as a student, and then I got to go back and perform as a professional. It was in Paris, in the school I went to in Paris, and a professional stage. Really lovely place.
And where would you love to perform but have not yet?
I mean, you're probably all expecting me to say Carnegie Hall, but I don't think that's it. I would love to play at one of the more eclectic New York venues, like the 92nd Street Y or the Poisson Rouge, something like that. Or National Sawdust even. Some of the venues that welcome, we didn't get a chance to talk about some of my work in inclusion and diversity, but Carnegie Hall has a little bit of a dirty history in terms of whom it serves, and some of the others are really open to audience experience over elitism, and I embrace that.
This is, and I'm so disappointed that we didn't quite get there, but
I'm
One of
chatty.
the things that really sets Claire apart, and I say that confidently, is that you really do kind of own that classical world without the elitism, and I'm going to call it snobbery that comes with it, because you really have your finger on the pulse of social justice and what it means to, and I think your Jewish heritage maybe subconsciously informs this, that there's an
Consciously, very
understanding, very
consciously.
consciously, of
Yeah.
what it means to be the other. Um, what is your favorite piece to perform? What just feels like comfort food for your fingers?
Ravel's Miroir.
Hmm.
That's my next recording project. In fact, current commissioning project. I'm commissioning 5 new pieces to go with Miroir. But a favorite, one that I've gone back to and gone back to and gone back to. Love that piece.
And
Set of
what
pieces.
is one piece that everyone loves that you could never play again and be okay with?
I would say, okay, so I will say I try to be open to anything, but a piece that is probably the last that I would choose is the Beethoven Opus 81A, Les Adieux. Da, dum, dum.
That's
And
exactly
part of
how
that,
it goes.
part of that is it just got played and played and played and played so badly, and you would think that would inspire me to want to do it right.
I
But
am
there's
so
so much
surprised.
out there to play.
Right? I'm so surprised you didn't say the Taco Bell canon. That, like, I
The
just, if one more person walks down the aisle to that,
Oh gosh. Well,
Anyway,
that's why I don't play weddings. That's why I don't do it.
right? Dr. Clare Longendyke, an absolute honor and a pleasure. Please do put in the chat links
Yes,
to
I will do that right now.
anything. Everyone, look on YouTube for some of her brilliant, brilliant work. And I know that you play regularly for classical music indie, and that Music in Bloom is co-sponsored by Eskenazi Health, and Music in Bloom is co-sponsored by IHC now, that we have made a commitment to be co-sponsors from now on, because this is just such an important project. And with someone like Claire at the helm, I have no doubt that it will continue to grow and be successful for many years to come. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
For your artistry. And thank you to each and every one of you for spending your evening with us. We will not have MasterClass next week because, God willing, you will choose to join us for a second night Seder next week. A different kind of MasterClass, we'll put it that way. All of our Passover information is on our website, ihcindy.org. And the week after, we have 2 more MasterClasses. We will sit with Mike Berg-Ronick. And then on April 11th, we will sit with IHC's own Adam Shapiro, who is in New York at this time. So thank you. Thank you again. Good night, Claire. Good night, everyone. Have a great week. Take care.
Thank you for having me. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.